My name is Kelly Askew, and I serve as Director of the African Studies Center here at the University of Michigan, where I also hold an appointment in the Departments of Anthropology and Afro-American and African Studies. It is my great pleasure to introduce a fellow anthropologist and a fellow Africanist, Professor Victoria Bernal, who's in the Department of Anthropology at University of California, Irvine. She has carried out ethnographic research in Sudan, Tanzania, Eritrea, and cyberspace, and works on issues pertaining to gender, migration, Islam, new media, nationalism, diaspora, violence, and civil society. She is the author of a book entitled Cultivating Workers, Peasants and Capitalism in a Sudanese Village. And she is currently completing a book on the Eritrean diaspora's use of cyberspace to participate in Eritrean politics, part of which we will be enjoying today. The title of the new book in progress is Nation as Network, Diaspora, Cyberspace, and Citizenship. She is co-editor with Inderpal Grewal of an anthology of feminist research on NGOs entitled NGOs and Feminism, Struggles, States, and Neoliberalism, currently under review, and is in the process of editing an anthology for use in teaching anthropology entitled Contemporary Cultures, Global Connections, Anthropology for the 21st Century. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Bernal, whose paper is entitled From the Social Network to the Facebook Revolution, Reflections on Culture and New Media. Thank you.
Okay, well, due to technical difficulties, this isn't, I'll just advance it by,
It's all set up for you.
is it? Oh, okay. And now it'll just go on its own? Okay, supposedly, the slides don't really, they just sort of vaguely illustrate my talk. So I'm hoping they'll just go on their own, because when I talk, I forget to advance the slides. All right, the recent film about the founding of Facebook, that's where, I mean, my title, you know, I was thinking about that, the social network, the film, and the contrast with how Egyptians were said to be using Facebook in the Tahrir Square demonstrations. The recent film about the founding of Facebook is a reminder of how so many of our ideas, myths, fears, and debates about the virtues and dangers of the internet, indeed about the very nature of cyberspace, are based in Western experience, Western constructions of individuality, and particularly in Western middle-class consumer culture. Yet millions of people in or from the global South are engaged in online activities. The so-called Facebook revolution in Egypt this spring is a telling example, since Egyptians used Facebook to support political demonstrations, connecting with Facebook for a purpose and in a context vastly different from those envisioned by Facebook's founders or represented in the dominant imagery surrounding social media and its users. My own ethnographic research explores the Eritrean diaspora's development of a vibrant online public sphere devoted to Eritrean national politics. But before discussing that, I want to explore further my argument that many of our ideas about new media are rooted in Western experience, and consider some of the contrasts with African experiences. And then I'll talk about a specific example of Eritrean politics online, and then move to thinking about what new media might mean in terms of area studies. I think I read Will's invitation too literally, so I thought that was my assignment. So currently, one of the main issues we hear about in relation to the internet is the indelible ink of online expression, particularly in terms of online practices of self-publicity, revelation, and/or self-making. Questions are raised about how to understand public and private in this new media world, where, if anywhere, the boundaries can be drawn around personal privacy. A recent example of self-expression and publicity was the anti-Asian YouTube rant of a UCLA student. I don't know how many people here were aware of that. That created such an uproar she dropped out of school. It was even discussed in a New York Times editorial. The student spoke from no position of authority, yet her words reverberated around the country and jumped from new media to old without a pause and with real-world consequences, at least for her. In North America and Europe, the question of what is private is being raised particularly in relation to the increasing commercialization of the internet and the efforts of corporations to use digital information and social networks for marketing purposes. A case in point is the controversy, which is ongoing, over Facebook's privacy settings and the new timeline they've created and so on. The UCLA rant gone viral and the debate around Facebook's privacy settings raise interesting and important questions. But like the movie, The Social Network, what these debates reveal is as much about contemporary concerns of the Western middle class as it is about the inherent social, economic, and political ramifications of new media. For Africans, in contrast to those in the global north, the great significance of new media may lie in the context of struggles for democracy, free press, and civil society. While for North Americans and Europeans, the lines of conflict over digital media form around issues of personal privacy versus unlimited publicity and corporate access. In African contexts, the tension is not so much about individuals' right to privacy as it is a tension between two kinds of public: the public of state-run, state-authorized media information and state-organized activities and institutions on the one hand, and the wider public of society seeking a means of expression and seeking alternative channels for political analysis, reporting, and for organizing social action. All right, now I'm skipping. All right. It's clearly a mistake to think of engagement with new media solely in terms of access to information, as many of our expressions around it suggest. I argue that power, violence, and the politics of knowledge need to be placed at the center of analyses of the internet. Notions like the information age, information technologies, and the digital divide are misleading in their suggestion that the internet is foremost about access to information, as if this is a pre-existing neutral social good. I coined the concept Infopolitics to refer to the power relations embedded in the creation and circulation of knowledge and to foreground the management of information as a central aspect of politics and a dimension of sovereignty. I was inspired by Foucault's concept of biopolitics, of course, and also by Achille Mbembe's notion of necropolitics. And I don't mean infopolitics to counter the importance of power over life and death, but really as a complement to that kind of power. Infopolitics is not limited to new media, but new media pose challenges to centralized systems that bring questions of politics of communication and information to the fore. New media are decentralizing communication and opening up alternative avenues of knowledge production and distribution. Attending to infopolitics brings into focus aspects of new media that have been under-theorized. I argue that part of the transformative power of the internet is not that it allows access to information, but rather that it allows ordinary people to question official narratives, to tell their own stories, to recontextualize existing knowledge and official narratives, and to create their own social networks for sharing and analyzing information rather than depending on established sources or conduits. This makes new media particularly significant for societies where forms of censorship and cultures of self-censorship constrict the public sphere. That's very much the case for Eritrea's public sphere, and I'll turn now to an example of how Eritreans have used the internet. But first, I need a drink of water. Eritreans in diaspora were quick to adopt the internet. Their first sort of computer-mediated political discussion group was actually before the World Wide Web, so they were quick to adopt it because they were already very highly socially networked transnationally. Okay, I'm skipping already. All right, well, Eritreans in diaspora, many were connected to the struggle for Eritrea's national liberation, and the Eritrean People's Liberation Front had organized very successfully transnationally. And the Eritrean state, since independence in the early 90s, has continued to maintain and develop links to the diaspora. So this non-electronic World Wide Web of Eritreans contributed to the appeal of the internet to Eritreans in diaspora and to their effective use of it, because they were already deeply involved in these transnational political networks. Eritreans in North America, Europe, and the Middle East participate passionately in Eritrean politics, even though they hold citizenship in other countries where they live, work, and raise their children. On the other side, the resources that Eritreans in diaspora funnel to Eritrea from abroad are vital to the nation. And that's part of, a main reason why the Eritrean state cultivates them and tries to keep them involved and keep them supportive. One of the striking features of the websites created by Eritreans in diaspora is that they have no counterpart in Eritrea, where media is government controlled. The main websites that I've been looking at are dahai.org, asmarino.com, and awate.com. And the example that I'm going to focus on today comes from awate.com. Eritreans in diaspora, particularly, they use the websites to debate among them, largely Eritreans in diaspora, who contribute most of the content to the websites, but they also have a great sense that the national leadership of Eritrea is listening and paying attention. And that feeling was created in the early days of Eritrean online activities, when ordinary Eritreans within the country really didn't have access. There were no cyber cafes or easy access to the internet for ordinary people until 2000. But the members of the government had internet connection. So in some ways, the online public sphere that developed was really linking the Eritrean diaspora to one another transnationally, and seemed to be like a conduit directly to the ears and eyes of the leadership of the Eritrean state. The websites connect Eritreans in the diaspora, and they connect the diaspora to Eritrea. And in a certain sense, the websites themselves constitute Eritrean-dominated space. Well, okay, I'm going to skip that. All right. All right. One of the example I want to talk about is the establishment of an online war memorial on awate.com. And it's one of these several websites that together really form a dynamic transnational public sphere. Over the past, and the websites really started out as a way of the diaspora to participate in nation building and to support the independent state's efforts. But gradually over time, as the state has become more and more repressive, the websites have become more and more a kind of offshore civil society where critical perspectives can be developed and disseminated that are not possible on the ground within Eritrea. Over the past decade, Eritreans in diaspora, have increasingly pursued possibilities for organizing themselves independently of the state. In 2005, an online war memorial was created by the Abate team, as the website managers call themselves, to commemorate and document the lives lost in the 1998-2000 border war with Eritrea. In doing so, they made public information that the government of Eritrea had withheld. And this development, I think, reflects a process of transformation of the Eritrean diaspora from being an arm of Eritrean nationalism reaching beyond Eritrea's borders to a form of transnational civil society that challenges the state's practices and policies, and in some cases challenges the legitimacy of the Eritrean state. Eritreans based in the U.S. drew upon their technological knowledge, their exposure to American political culture and American current events, and their distance from the Eritrean state's regulation of media and censorship of information in constructing the memorial. At the same time, they acted on behalf of the public good, providing a service to Eritreans everywhere inside and outside Eritrea. In constructing the war memorial, these ordinary citizens took on functions normally carried out by the state, not simply commemorating the dead, but also representing the nation and asserting core national values. The Abate team's act also served as a protest and a challenge to the regime in Eritrea. The memorial and its accompanying text expose the failure of the state to act in the best interests of its citizens, in engaging in warfare and in dealing with the deaths that resulted from putting its citizens in harm's way. And I have to skip a lot of the description of the website, and I can't even, now it is hidden in the archives, which is something I want to look into more, it was up for a number of years, but why they chose, to hide it, I'm not sure. But, all right. So, well, one thing I've kind of skipped, but I need to mention is that in Eritrea, people who die for the nation are called martyrs. So all of the people who died in the liberation struggle are called martyrs, and people who were killed in the border war with Ethiopia were called martyrs. So there's reference to the martyrs, and the memorial is called the Martyrs Album. So these are not suicide bombers or anything. That's the term that is used. Well, an interesting thing is that although, with this whole iconography around martyrs within Eritrea, people who die for the country are honored and celebrated, at the same time, the government has withheld information about the lives lost in the recent border war. And it's, this contradiction is something that the Abate team are responding to in creating the online memorial. And here I describe in detail what the memorial looks like. The main content of the memorial is a homepage on which there are a series of boxes with a link for each year from the start of the border war with Ethiopia in 1998 until 2003, because people kept dying as a result of the war, even after the war ended in 2000. By clicking on the year, a reader could see a list of the names of the people who died that year, along with their rank, service assignment, year of birth, and age at death. In his influential, and so it has that's the main thing, the memorial, where it's the links to the names, and attached to that is a complicated statistical report that shows where most of the deaths occurred, gender, all kinds of different characteristics of the people who died. And I thought this related in an interesting way to Benedict Anderson's idea in Imagined Communities about the map, the census, and the museum as key to the formation of national imaginaries. And I think the War Memorial, often museums are war memorials too, and I think the War Memorial is a key to Eritrean national imaginary. And it's interesting that here the government was not creating it, but rather this group in Diaspora was creating it online. And similar, the report that went along with the memorial is very much like a census, because it's all the statistical about the population of the people who died. Unlike a monument or a museum, which require a physical location, memorials are often more conceptual in nature. It could be a day, a conference, or a space. And unlike anything located in physical space or a map which emphasizes territorial boundaries of the nation and foregrounds the division between everything and everyone internal to the nation and all that lies outside it, the online memorial obscures such distinctions, effacing borders and distances. No matter where they are, if they have access to a computer, Eritreans can experience the memorial firsthand. Through the memorial, Eritreans are connected to the dead, and through the dead to the nation. It thus presents the nation as a social formation rather than a territorial state. This point is further evidenced in the facts section of the memorial, where the Abate team, they created a lot of text to accompany the memorial. They explain that in order to assess how complete the data that they had obtained, which was actually leaked government documents. This is before WikiLeaks. Eritrea had its own government leaking to the Diaspora's websites. But they said, to test how complete it might be, they said, quote, "We conducted a small sampling. We searched for names of martyrs, those of our family and friends," end quote. In this way, the Abate team connects itself through kinship and social relations to the national community rather than through physical presence or legal status. The statement positions the Abate team clearly as insiders to Eritrean experience, even if located outside of Eritrea, making clear that they have personally shared the losses caused by war. So here the ambiguity of cyberspace and diaspora works so as to make it possible to be simultaneously outside and inside the nation. In addition to the martyrs' names, the memorial page contains a report titled "Profiling Our Martyrs, a Statistical Report." And that's the one that's more like a census. And it's also a form of state-like action on behalf of the nation and a representation of the nation. But instead of being published officially by the Eritrean state, it's been published in unauthorized form on a website by Eritreans in diaspora. But it's interesting that even though in many ways the memorial is an act of protest, it's done in a very much in a national language and very much taking on the form of official national communications and so on. So it's very much speaking as a nation, not speaking as the diaspora or speaking as a group of dissidents, which I think is quite interesting. All right, let's see. These are all the good parts, right? I was like condensing. All right. The Abate team in the facts section, they explain that their objective is to, quote, "provide as full accounting as possible, to provide information so we can demand accountability from those responsible for the policies that resulted in this tragedy, and finally to promote a culture of peace," end quote. The statement emphasizes the memorial as a political protest and suggests that they're not providing the information solely as a service to the nation, but with the goal of mobilizing Eritreans to make demands upon the Eritrean state. All right, I'll skip that. I don't know. How am I doing on time? You're fine. I'm good? All right. 5 minutes. All right. The Abate team is stepping in where it sees the Eritrean state as having failed. It presents the case for why such a memorial is legitimate and directly addresses criticisms it says some Eritreans have leveled, questioning their, quote, mandate, they use the language about their mandate, their, quote, right to publish, and their, quote, right to censor information related to martyrs. These legalistic terms reflect a tone not of radical dissidence or passion, but of measured, impartial official language. And the body of the report is constructed much like a government report. And in fact, that part might be just the leaked government documents. It's not clear to what degree they did edit that part of it with tables and various statistical breakdowns. So in some ways, the Abate team are acting like the state they wish to see in Eritrea, making information of national interest public, publishing a census of sorts of the dead and constructing a war memorial, and representing collective national values because they talk about the value of life and so on, as well as offering leadership in terms of educating the public on how to read and think about the information they provide. One thing I had to skip here is there's actually some very interesting parts where they draw on American examples of the Vietnam War Memorial, and they quote Mayor Giuliani, who on September 11th had said, September 11th had said, life is precious. And they sort of contrast the amount of soul searching and changes that happened in America after the attacks of 9/11 with kind of the cover up and the clamping down of the Eritrean government on the information of who died in the war that it had waged. So the memorial implicitly and explicitly critiques the Eritrean state's management of the war and war deaths, and at a deeper level, questions the legitimacy of the border war and ultimately of the state that waged it. All right, I don't know why. Is it dry or just? Okay, now I'm shifting to my conclusion where I try to draw some general things. The uses and consequences of the internet are not the same everywhere, and for this reason, we should not think of the internet as one thing, but rather as an array of diverse phenomena. We may not be able to say what the significance of new media are in general terms. We need ethnographic studies and maybe other kinds of studies, but as an anthropologist, of specific communities and contexts to show how new media are being used, by whom, and with what effects. The memorial created by Eritreans based in the U.S. and located in cyberspace illustrates the ways that transnational political fields have emerged that alter the dynamics between citizens and states. We're entering a new political age where media and mobility reshape political relationships. There's a particular synergy, I think, between diasporas and the internet. Due to migration and technological advances in communications, social geographies diverge more and more from the maps of political geography. The internet offers channels and ambiguous spaces that mediate gaps and connect people in new ways. While diasporas have an ancient history and transnational connections flourished long before the internet, new connections and disjunctions are altering the landscapes of citizenship and politics. Cyberspace as a transnational medium that eludes state regulation to a considerable degree also poses challenges to conventional, territorially based state sovereignty. It is a game changer in terms of what I call infopolitics, the way that power is exercised and expressed through communication and through control over media, circulation, censorship, and authorization. The less powerful, like Eritreans in diaspora, who are displaced and doubly marginal, are using the internet to construct new spaces of belonging and participation and to expand the boundaries of what can be publicly expressed. Many of the key defining elements of Eritrean political culture, protracted war, militarization, censorship, repression of civil society, preoccupation with national security, and centralized top-down command structures, are found in many parts of the world and especially in Africa. Therefore, my analysis of Eritrean politics online can speak to larger questions of sovereignty and struggles for democracy in many contexts, particularly on the African continent. The internet's ability to transcend time and space is revolutionary. Curfews and restrictions on public gatherings don't work if people can continue to meet online and plan together and coordinate future activities, as we saw in Cairo. Censorship also fails when people can disseminate and receive news and information from unofficial sources. And the decentralized nature of new media is particularly important in contexts where repression and censorship are state practices. One important thing Facebook in Cairo and Eritrean websites in the U.S. show us is that the liberating potential of new media is not necessarily about connecting to global information flows or communicating to a global audience, but about the ways in which the internet can be used to mobilize particular constituencies and to extend local social networks and to increase participation in particular contexts on the ground. In terms of area studies, we have to think about the rise of migrants and the mobility of people in the 21st century in conjunction with the rise of new media. The boundaries between nations and regions don't contain their populations, and through new media, populations of migrants and diasporas are able to maintain relationships and participate in various ways in the communities and nations they left. These nations and societies often seek their remittances and their investment, and so these are very economically as well as politically significant relationships. We may need to start thinking of areas not so much in geographic terms, but in terms of membership in cultural communities. For example, because of racism, Africans in America have largely been invisible as Africans, and that obscures a lot of interesting things that are going on. And, you know, I've tried to show how the Eritrean diaspora are producing national media from outside the nation. And, you know, thinking about how the position of the diaspora and cyberspace as both inside and outside the nation brings into focus challenges faced by citizens and states in the present era of technology and mobility. I think we also have to think more about the ambiguity and the way that people are multiply located and have simultaneous identities and complex life trajectories. New media are changing our relationship to location, to distance, and to space with implications for area studies.